How does trauma impact you emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, grammatically? Mended Light. Now, just a trigger warning, we are going to be talking about, just on a very surface level, what trauma is and what our responses are to it. Mm-hmm. And we believe that this video will be helpful for people who have been through trauma, but we just want you to be ready. Be ready for that conversation. Folks, we often talk about the body and the mind and the heart as if they were three separate things, but they're not. Our thoughts and our feelings, they're all part of the same physical system.
Yeah.
And our thoughts affect our feelings, affect our bodies, and vice versa, and combinations in all directions.
Yeah. Well, and the Western world, if you will, creates those boxes, I would say.
Yeah.
And the Eastern world does not as much. And there's a fabulous book on this called The Body Keeps the Score. If you want to dive in deep, I would definitely recommend that. But we're going to talk on a surface level of what trauma looks like and how it affects us physically, mentally, and emotionally. So your nervous system has 3 levels of dealing with a threat, if you will. Your first response is social engagement. If you feel threatened, you're going to call out for help. You're going to seek support from someone you trust, a parent, a family member, someone that's trustworthy. Mm-hmm. But if no one comes to your aid or you're in immediate danger, you're going to go to a more primitive way of surviving, which is your fight or your flight. You fight off an attacker or you run to a safe place. So if that fails and you can't get away or you're held down or you're trapped or you're unable to protect yourself, you will preserve yourself by shutting down and going to a place of freeze or collapse. And this last stage happens if abuse or trauma is experienced without the ability to escape.
Good. And we see this in the animal kingdom as well as in humans, right? Mm-hmm. Fight. There are definitely animals that when challenged, they will fight. Although most animals will flee if they can, right? They fight if they're backed into a corner and they have to. But what happens in our case, if it's a caretaker or a parent or someone that you trust or someone that you can't get away from.
Yeah, is in a position of authority in your life.
Is that maybe you tried running and you got in more trouble, right? Or you tried fighting and it made things worse. And so you just go to freeze.
Yeah.
And oftentimes this is paired with dissociation where your brain detaches from the physical experience in order to preserve some psychological or emotional sense of safety because physically it's not there. And in cases where it's a caretaker or a parent and it's not a or somebody else in your life that it's not a one-time event, it's repeated over and over and over again, we can develop what is known as complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which carries the same symptoms, but is generally even more severe and harder to work your way through. To recap, your brain's 3 stages of dealing with threats are 1, call for help, fight or flight, collapse or freeze.
It's important to understand that after trauma, you experience the world with a different nervous system.
Yeah.
When something reminds you of the past, your right brain reacts as if the traumatic event were happening in the present, because the left side of your brain is not working very well. And you may not be aware that you are re-experiencing or reenacting the past. You may be furious, terrified, enraged, ashamed, or frozen. You might be stuck in one of the 3 levels you experienced when the traumatic event actually happened.
And we have learned that trauma is not just an experience that took place in the past. It is also the mark that experience left on the mind, on the brain, and on the body. The trauma affects our mental, emotional, and physical health. This mark has ongoing consequences for how the individual manages to survive in the present. Trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way the mind and brain manage perceptions, or how we interpret our experiences. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but also our very capacity to think. If you've experienced a trauma, while finding the words to describe what has happened to you can be profoundly meaningful, it is often not enough. The act of telling the story doesn't necessarily alter the automatic physical and hormonal responses of your mind and body, which remain hypervigilant, prepared to be assaulted or violated at any time. For real change to take place, the body and mind have to learn that the danger has passed and it's time to live in the present.
Well, and that's why we talk so much about safety
Yeah.
And before you do trauma work, being in a safe place, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. And that's kind of like a catch-22, because that is a relearning that you're having to go through.
Yeah.
Specifically, because you can physically be in a safe place mentally, emotionally, and in all the ways, and for it to still feel like it's not safe.
Yeah.
And so that's the relearning that has to take place. But if you're trying to work through that, and maybe your environment isn't a safe one,
Yeah.
like it's just going to cause triggering and triggering and triggering.
Yeah.
Dr. van der Kolk put it this way in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. He says, traumatized people keep secreting large amounts of stress hormones long after the actual danger has passed. Ideally, our stress hormone system should provide a lightning-fast response to threat, but then quickly return us to an equilibrium. In PTSD patients, however, the stress hormone system fails at this balancing act. Fight, flight, or freeze signals continue after the danger is over and do not return to normal. Instead, the continued secretion of stress hormones is expressed as agitation and panic, which in the long term wreak havoc on their physical health. And this is one of the reasons trauma can be so challenging, is because it does affect every aspect of who we are. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. It affects us in all these ways.
Well, and I think one of the more obvious and known cases of this, or instances of this that we see all the time, is soldiers returning home from war and having a hard time adjusting to civilian life, where things are presumably, they're safe, right? They're not in the line of fire anymore, but they feel like they are.
Right.
And actually being able to relax feels like a dangerous thing to do, because relaxing over there could get you killed.
Yeah.
And we think of them, but we don't often think of the person whose spouse cheated on them, and now they don't know how to enter into a new relationship because they're always afraid that they're going to be betrayed. Or the child who was abused and then goes to live with other relatives who are not abusive. And yet if they raise their voices or they're disappointed in any way, that child is primed that something terrible is about to happen.
Or the child that was abused and then grew up and tries to enter into a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And their partner might be safe and healthy, but it still doesn't feel safe. Or they might be repeating the patterns of their childhood and their partner might not be safe and healthy.
What this is the body and the brain doing what it's designed to do, which is keep you safe, right? Keeping you on high alert for another threat. And that serves you when threats abound. But when they don't, it's detrimental. It keeps you from healing and moving forward. And so part of that is when you are in a threatening situation, emotionally, psychologically, or physically, you feel protective, right? So you're afraid, and so you feel like fighting or running or freezing, right? Or fawning to please people. But what you're not necessarily allowed to feel in those moments is sad or hurt or openly scared or in need of comfort, right? And so we teach ourselves to not feel those things because sometimes they're punished or they're not reinforced or they don't bring us the comfort that we're searching for. And in order for us to heal, we have to be safe. We have to be in a place of physical, psychological, emotional safety. And then we have to express those things that we weren't giving ourselves permission to express before. To free yourself from trauma, you need to give yourself permission to feel what you weren't allowed to feel when the trauma was taking place or in all the time since.
Well, and until you can express those feelings, they will scream for your attention, and the more you try to suppress them, the more violently they will beg to be acknowledged, and the scarier they're going to seem to confront.
Well, and something I know is very true is that we give things power over us when we refuse to face them, when we refuse to feel them, when we refuse to express them. For those who have seen the movie It, right, the more afraid they are and the more they avoid this terrifying, it's a metaphor, but they avoid this terrifying clown, the more powerful he becomes.
Yeah.
And the more they face him and they tell him that they're not afraid of him or that they are afraid but they're standing their ground, the smaller and more pathetic he gets and he has less and less power over them. And that's very true, which isn't to say that our traumas are small and weak or pathetic and it's all in our head. It's just saying that when we work through things, when we stop running, we diminish their power over us. We take our power back.
Yeah. Well, and it's important to note that there's specific components that need to be involved in the facing them and the stop running, right? First off, it needs to be safe, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be safe in all the ways, even if we don't feel safe, right? And then second, there is so much judgment unconsciously built around trauma that we have to put down our judgment regarding ourselves and our experiences, and we have to meet ourselves with self-compassion.
Yes.
And then once we're in a place of safety and we're able to meet our experience with self-compassion, we can confront those false beliefs, those untruths that we have taken quite often responsibility for. We've taken responsibility for things that aren't our responsibility.
Yeah.
We've told ourselves stories about how someone's treated us and what it means about us that simply aren't true. And so it's like this massive ball of yarn that we have to unknot, and we don't know how. And it's so confusing, and it feels like this dark room that we're muddling our way through. That's scary and exhausting and terrifying. And those are the reasons that we go into fight or flight or fawn or freeze, because we simply just don't know how. We simply just don't know how to confront our trauma in a healthy, supportive, loving way. And that's why we do what we do here at Mended Light, is to spread that light, to spread that knowledge, so you're not alone.
Brene Brown said, "There is incredible relief and power in naming and normalizing fear and uncertainty. And trauma, as well as stress experienced after trauma, is nothing if not uncertain and fearful."
Well, and as we better understand what we're going through, that increases our ability to communicate our experience, have compassion for ourselves, and create understanding with our spouses, our children, our friends, our family, our loved ones. The support and understanding from a community is critical in healing. The love and understanding that our community shows us becomes a mirror and an example of how to love and accept ourselves.
Now, if you would like support with that process, we invite you to schedule a complimentary 15-minute consultation with a member of our team. They're going to talk with you about working together through our innate healing program, which, depending on your budget and your needs, can be done one-on-one with one of our counselors or as part of a group. And you can do that by following this link right here or in the description.